So, it's been pointed out to me that I've been playing the combat completely wrong here in terms of the die rolling mechanics. I actually even explained it wrong, I think, in my intro, because the rules are not very well laid out, actually. Anyway, mistake aside, let's look at what happened. Instead of adding the dice together as I was, you're supposed to take the difference of the dice as an absolute value. It's of course not stated that clearly, but I wouldn't expect that from these rules. The only place it's really mentioned looks like it's here. The attacker then rolls the dice. He adds the difference between the two dice to his total. Now, you know, the second time when I read this, I'm just skimming it. A little bit of help saying, hey, this is weird. This isn't like every other game you've seen. Because really the rest of the game seems to follow pretty standard principles here. I guess for those people who know Martin Wallace and say, oh, there's always going to be weird dice involved in it or something like that, they can move towards that. But me, I had heard that. Probably had heard this example before. But it wasn't really clear, and it's not nicely spelled out. There is an example here. I mean, e.g. a roll of 4 and 6 would make a 2 to the total. But it just doesn't play to my way of learning very nicely to have, in the middle of some paragraph, the key die rolling rule. It's one of the reasons, and never mentioned anywhere else, not highlighted, no interesting way of seeing it. Okay, so what's the effect on the game of what I've done? Well, if you end up playing it the way it's written, it does two things. One, it makes the 7 evenly distributed across the values, essentially, I think. Because, yeah. So every value you can get can produce a 7. So the chance for those two casualties is higher. And then it also shortens the bell curve without disturbing it. You have that same 2d6 bell curve, which is, you know, certainly smoother and nicer looking than a single die roll. And by shortening the bell curves, you make the modifiers more important. You make it a less of an extreme results possibility available. Okay. Change the game tremendously? Yeah, I mean, there's probably less luck involved in it the way it's written. I don't feel like it's going to change my opinion of it too much, and I feel that since I started playing this way, and it's such a significant change to the combat dynamics, I'm going to just keep playing it wrong. Not forever, but for the rest of this game. I don't want to change it now, because I do feel like the dynamics of attacks are going to be modified severely by it. The other thing is that 7. I think I used it once, or maybe throughout the first couple rounds, but I've forgotten it since then. You know, it was very easy to walk away from the table and just not remember that one rule. Again, something buried in there, but not a big deal on that one in terms of, you know, I tend to screw things up and forget rules pretty easily. In terms of just not noticing the difference one, though, that's pretty big, and I hold the rules accountable for that. Not that they're wrong, just that they're designed in such a way that it's very easy to miss things like that. And I've had the same issue with, I don't remember what it was, I think Chicago Express and Age of Steam, where there were, Age of Steam would be the best example, being another Wallace game, where, you know, something important was just in some sentence in the middle of a paragraph. Now, one is not expected to memorize paragraphs, word for words. You recognize big ideas in the game, and distilling that from a paragraph is a much harder aspect, or a much harder task, than trying to pull it out of, say, an SPI case system. Or, for what it's told, even though I actually prefer this style of rules, it's a better, it's actually easier to distill it from some of those really ugly Avalon Hill-ish, more recent games with their big color spreads and a paragraph that contains just a single concept in it. This is too dense for something that you should be learning a procedural action like the rules to a game. It reads nicer though, and I'd actually prefer it to those big full color things like Fantasy Flight puts out or whatever, that I just don't want to face them. I mean, they're ugly, they're hideous, they're no pleasure to read. This was a pleasure to read. I just am not going to get all the information from it by reading it. Whereas a nice case numbered system, the old SPI version or the gamer's style, is very, very helpful at clearly stating each thing it wants to state in separation and isolation. And that's how I want my rules, to tell you the truth. All right. Well, on with playing, and we're going to be hitting what the bidding for the alliances for this, the third war. All right, so here we are. Just went around on the first time. I think Austria went last. I cleaned the alliances off and I forgot. And I was just about to promote this one. It went through without any dissent. Austria picked to be in opposition to Britain and get the chance to go first. Because of a slight edge as I see it, I'm not sure. It might be an advantage going later in the turn. It's hard to tell. But in particular, what they wanted was to be able to directly attack the British and be able to try and gain some space on the Brits. And so that goal was there. I found another role, though, that was pointed out to me as being an error in my playing so far. And yeah, I remember this one when I went through the rules. It's just, I don't know. These light games, it's really tough for me to remember their rules for some reason in a way that I feel is not as tough with heavier games in particular, even given the same, well, I have trouble with some of the heavier ones too. But I'm less likely to look things up in something like this because it feels like, I know all the rules. Well, I didn't, and one that I forgot, that I went over in, I think, my rules description, but then didn't play, was these diplomacy counters. At the end of each war, they go back. They go back into the pile to be available. Now, two things this does. One, it makes the Spanish purchase of the diplomatic service, had the actual rules been in place, more valuable. There will always be chits to take from diplomacy. It also means that you don't have these diplomatic alliances that you don't really want. So, for example, the Spanish have this Native Americans alliance, and they can't use that without coming into North America. But if they had to use their diplomatic service or specifically purchase the alliances that they wanted each turn, each war, that puts it in a different perspective where once they're out of an area, they don't have to worry about their alliance anymore. And then it also becomes available to other players who are involved in that area. Fair enough, but like the other thing, I'm going to leave it as it is because I've played this through. It's a flawed playing. A lot of my playings are. We'll deal with it. Okay, so that first one passes, and now we're on to a Russian pick. I don't know what they're going to do, but I'll come back and give some commentary with whatever the picks are. Now we're ready to go to the first round. One thing, with all the rules, forgetfulness or mistakes, I forgot to put the counters out. I did that, overviewed the alliances that were being formed, and decided that everything's okay there. I don't know what these counters are for. I guess they're the old ones, and I didn't use them. I picked new ones or something. I don't know. But anyway, we have the alliance setups here. As the initial, Austria pushed forward the anti-British alliance, and they wanted to go early. Then the Russians said, okay, well, Spain's also in a good position to attack the British, and I'd like the French to be attacking the Austrians. And that actually passed by. Austria considered trying to intervene on that. But they're looking at it and saying, you know, France doesn't have a lot of force. All that means is I can't ship stuff back as easily into Germany to fight the Brits, but that's okay. I don't feel very threatened by this. And France is really in no position to attack the Brits, so that's fair enough. They're going to be looking for their own points. Probably not by wiping out the Austrians particularly. So Russia's attempt passed as well. Then the next one was the Prussians, who said, well, the Russians are the last people who need to attack the Brits, so I'll put them on an anti-British, and I'll put myself anti-Russian. Why? Well, largely to force an alliance with the French, because they don't want the French to try to pick off their position in the East Indies. They don't see the position in the Mediterranean too threatened by the Russians if the Russians are actually going to attack the British, which they kind of have to do. So they won't lose points there. And then finally the Dutch, the French picked them on their side, and no one objected terribly enough to this to spend a buck and move them to the other side. The Dutch, yes, they're in Europe, they want points in Europe, but they're really not too likely to take down any of the English positions, given that there's someone else already committed to attacking in each of those other positions. So having the Dutch here wasn't harmful. The French are kind of happy about it. It means they get to keep their South American holding. And the Dutch weren't really willing to pay. There are opportunities elsewhere. Whatever they can get in South America just isn't worth the big fight for it. Now, the end of game victory points are really a matter of the base victory points that we'll have calculated through normal means, scoring off the territories, as well as, well, those have all been taken, the industrialization actions, which have added to that track already, minus the penalties for the end of game victory points, which is 7 for the person with the highest unrest, and then the second unrest, 4. And again, that's split up among the players. So if 2 people have the highest, they both lose 7, and still the second highest people lose 4 each. So there's not a lot you can do there except try to limit the amount of unrest you're actually taking. Alright, we're ready to roll into that first round, and I'm going to load this one up because, well, there's a lot of words in it, and not a lot of play having happened. Alright.